People often get confused by if GML passes by value or by reference, which is important to understand to avoid difficult to find bugs in your game code. Given a function like this, take damage, when you pass in a function value underscore player, it will either pass in by value or by reference, depending on the variable type. Meaning, if I create a new variable here called player, I pass that into the take damage function, then is our underscore player argument up here by reference, or is it a copy of the value? This impacts our original variable, player, on if it gets modified or not. In this example, it will. After the take damage call, if we print this, we'll see that HP has been reduced by 1, as you would expect it to. If the variable is a primitive, for example, a number, string, boolean, it copies the value when the function is called. So in this example, the variable underscore HP is a copy of the value from player.hp. If you tried to change it within the take damage function, it will not affect our original player.hp value over here. If we print that player HP after the take damage call, then you'll see that it has not changed at all. It's still 10. But for other non-primitive data types, it will pass a reference to the original. So a struct, for example, will get passed by reference. This can be confusing, so you need to stay diligent about your data types, which data types you are using. Here are some helpful tips to avoid some of the most annoying bugs related to this. First, don't modify your function arguments unless you have to. Can your function return a value instead of modifying? With a function like this, you do not need to consider if the argument is a value copy or a reference. Treat the argument as immutable. Here we are returning the value from take damage and then resetting the player HP to the return value from the call to take damage. There are some downsides to be aware of, as depending on the input and the output, you may trigger more memory allocations than necessary. But depending on the type of game, size of game, target platforms, it may or may not matter. 2, if you need to pass it by reference, then wrap it. Looking back at our take damage example, HP is expecting a number, but we can modify this to take a struct, for example. This now is back to our original example with our player struct, but we can also add additional structs as needed if there is a good reason. So for example, if there's some reason why you need a health struct, then you can pass it by reference here instead of passing the entire player struct. And finally, if you're dealing with object instances, then you have the option to just pass a reference to the instance. Given a function that modifies the health of an object instance, you may be able to just pass that instance if the health is assigned to the instance. Here we have an instance with the hit points instance variable. In the step event, we have the take damage function, which is defined in a script. We can pass a reference to the instance by passing self into the take damage function, and then we can modify the hit points of that instance by either modifying it directly using instance.hitpoints, or we can use the with keyword. I would consider a couple of things when you write code like this, though. Please ask yourself, does this function need to have a reference? Can I just return a value instead? Will that make my code simpler? Does it make sense to have the function outside of an object, or should it just be a method? If you want to dig deeper into references, there's a really good write-up from Yellow Afterlife on his blog. And if you learned anything new from this video, please support the channel and click those buttons. Happy coding.